Welcome to the Shema podcast series, Strive for Truth. This series is based on the teachings of Rabbi Rav Dessler, one of the most profound Torah thinkers of the early 20th century. In these conversations, I'm joined by Rabbi Michael Cohen, a longtime student and teacher of his work. This is not a series about inspiration or quick takeaways. It's about clarity, learning to see reality honestly and aligning our lives with what is real. I want to personally invite you to something I'm hosting this Shavuos night, the evening of Thursday, May 21st. I'm hosting an all-night learning here in Houston in a small, focused setting with Rabbanim you've heard on the podcast. Rabbi Shlomo Pill, Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe, Rabbi Mizell, Rabbi Ari Wolbe, and I'll be a part of the lineup as well. We'll be learning straight through the night and then davening a Nate's Minyan together at sunrise. This is not a big event. Space is very limited. It's meant to be intimate, serious, and real. If you're interested, email me at shemapodcastshow@gmail.com or join the WhatsApp community through the link in the show notes and message me there. If this speaks to you, reach out. I'd love to have you there. Now to the show. Welcome back to the Shema podcast, my friends, and our Strive for Truth series with Rabbi Cohen. Before we get into today's essay, I want to take a moment to clearly recap what we built so far, because if we don't, this may sound like more of the same, and certainly not. What Rav Dessler is doing in this essay, titled, the English translation, The Ego, the Inclinations, the Spirit, and the Soul, he's not just repeating the idea of bias or distortion. He's taking it to a completely different level. So let's recap what we've covered so far on this specific matter. In episode 1, we introduced the idea that we are not our thoughts, that there's an internal dialogue we can step back from and observe. In episode 7, we saw that our thinking is not objective. We are influenced by bias and tend to justify what we already want. And in episode 9, we went even further, that even when a person is sincere and trying to do the right thing, they can still get it wrong because they unconsciously want a certain outcome. So they build the logic for their decision-making in a way that will get them to arrive at the outcome they inherently wanted all along. So if we summarize where we are, we have an internal dialogue. That dialogue is biased, and that bias leads us to justify what we want. But here's where Rav Dessler pushes this further. Maybe the simplest way to understand it is like this. Imagine solving a math problem. You go step by step. You apply the right formula. Your logic is sound. The problem is that the numbers you were given at the start are wrong, but you don't know they're wrong. So no matter how well you think clearly and do the math, you're going to get the wrong answer. Not because, again, your reasoning has failed you, but because your perception of the inputs was distorted. And that's what this essay is introducing. That when the Yetzer Hara is involved, it's not just that we think incorrectly, it's that the inputs we're working with are already wrong. Before we even begin to think, the Yetzer Hara interjects itself into the situation to shape how we are perceiving the situation, which means the question is no longer, am I thinking clearly, but something much more uncomfortable. Is what I am perceiving even true? Welcome back, Rabbi Cohen. I think this is a good place to start.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's a lot to unpack.
Yes, it is. Because you read, once you, I read this essay, I read this essay so many times, I finally got what he was saying. And it was just like, is there any hope? But there is. I mean, first, again, like we discussed before, identify what the tactics being used are against you, then you can begin to really grow.
Yes. Yeah, it's actually really, I mean, as you say, the title of this essay is The Ego, the Inclination, the Spirit, and the Soul. So we hear that it's talking about many different parts of us. And the book is called Strive for Truth, which is all about the whole life of authenticity and a strive. It's a journey that we're all on, which is to find the truth in our lives and in the world around us and to live our lives in this beautiful world.
We see now that the Yetzer Hara he's trying to had many arsenal, many tactics to basically just obscure the truth from all of our sensory perception, all of our reasoning.
Right. And then in the middle of that is there's us. This is an essay. It's a letter, actually, that Rabbi Dessler wrote while I was on the train, while visiting a student during the war, 1940. So you can imagine Rabbi Dessler is in England. He has he's a rabbi of a shul in the Lower East Side, in east end of England, and he's visiting his students who've been displaced because of the blitz of the war. So he had one of his students was in Bournemouth. He took a train. This was hours of travel to go and visit his student to give him encouragement. On the train back, he's writing a letter to another student who's asked him about the makeup of our psyche, of a person, right? What is the makeup? We talk about the nefesh, the soul, the animal soul, the ruach, the spirit, the neshama, the soul that was breathed into man at creation. What are all these parts of us? And we, as you mentioned, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the good inclination. Like, what are these? How do these contribute? Who am I? Where am I in the whole life in this world? And so he starts out by saying that of course we have a nefesh. God created all the animals in the world. He created, and each time he created an animal, it says that they were a nefesh chaya. They were a living force, a nefesh chaya. He created the animals, the cows, the plants, and the insects. Everything's a nefesh chaya, a living nefesh, a living type of soul. And Rabbi Dessler gives us an approach over here which maybe doesn't dovetail with some things that we've learned in the past, in other svarim, in other books. But he gives us his way of his Kabbalah, his tradition. And he says what he's learned is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew into Adam a nishmat chaim, a neshama of life. Now, he had a nefesh. So there's a neshama, which is a neshama, a soul, but Adam already had what the other animals have. The animals have, not the other animals, but the animals had. The animals have a nefesh chaya. So that some people talk about that like the life force. But Rabbi Dessler says it's not just a life force, because actually it's a nefesh chaya, it's life, and this person, Adam, who had the nefesh chaya, who had this life force in him, was Adam at that time. So he was Adam, and he had a nefesh chaya, he had a living nefesh, a life force, a living. And his life force, says Rabbi Dessler, was greater than that of the animals, because he had the ability to think and speak. So that is the nefesh, that's the nefesh, and that's Adam. Now, with that nefesh, Rabbi Dessler tells us, there was also a spirit of good and bad, in the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov within it. So he had a nature to want to do good, a nature to want to do bad, inside of him at that time. That's the nefesh. That's the starting place. So if a person were to say, who am I? That's where you're going to find yourself, in the nefesh. That's not what many people are accustomed to thinking, and it's a new way of thinking for some. But what he's saying is that is the nefesh, and that's who we are. Then, besides that, he introduces in this letter, to the idea of that outside of that, there are two angels that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created to escort us throughout our lives. One is the angel of good, that is there to advocate for us, for the good. And one is the Yetzer Hara, which is actually synonymous, which is the angel of death, which is the Satan, which is trying to advocate for the bad and point out the negative things that we are doing. These two are observers, an advocate, a prosecutor and an advocate who are both watching what's happening. So just to summarize, you have the nefesh, which is the life force, and that has within it an innate nature to do good and to do bad. And then outside you have two observers, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the Malach HaTov and Malach Hara. One is the advocate who wants to advocate for good, and one is the prosecutor. Now HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw this, and it says, Vayipach ba'apa. Now God bestowed upon that creature, that Adam, a neshama. So that's something extra. That's a new dimension. Now we have to start thinking in a new way. What's that all about? What's this neshama about? So the way I understand it is that we often live in a world, and this he says this, I'm sorry, Rabbi Dessler says this, a person often lives in this world and they're living with their Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, and they're pulled to do good and they're pulled to do bad. And they can live in this world with their Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov and be good people. They can be living in this world but not actually experiencing Kedusha, holiness, the holiness that the neshama is there to provide. So there's this connection with God, this breath of God, as it were, that Hashem breathed into us, which presents to us our neshama. That's a neshama tahora, a very pure, a connection to Hashem that we can all have if we look for it, if we are receptive to it, if we connect to it. But he gives the example like this. He says, many people keep Shabbat. So we know that there's Shabbat observance. There's certain things you can't do. You cannot engage in creative activities on Shabbat. So we know that, okay, that's Shabbat. Okay, that's Shabbat. We got it. You got to make Kiddush. You make Kiddush on Shabbat. You make a blessing on the wine, and you have Challah, and you have a meal. But there's something which we call the neshama yisera. There's an extra neshama that we can have on Shabbat, an extra soul that is bestowed upon us, an extra soul, another soul, a further soul which is given to us on Shabbat. And that's something. Now, if a person keeps Shabbat, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to connect with their neshama yisera, says Rabbi Dessler. It can be the person will keep Shabbat and just do Shabbat and just do it without actually connecting, and they're not feeling the spirituality of a Shabbat. And if a person were to do that, they just missed the Kedusha of Shabbat. They didn't get the neshama yisera, because it's there, but you have to receive it, you have to go into it, you have to connect to it. And the same way that there's the neshama yisera on Shabbat, and if you kept Shabbat, but you didn't feel the neshama yisera, you just didn't get that neshama yisera. So too, actually, every single day of our lives living in this world, there's a neshama for us to connect to, for us to feel the holiness and spirituality of godliness in this world, for us to connect to. If we connect to and feel it, great. And if we don't, we just didn't get it.
Okay, so this whole idea of this, it's always interesting to sort of dive into the construct of man, construct of ourselves with this composite creature. And one idea we've discussed on this podcast before is that Hashem couldn't fully create us as independent beings. Everything we've discussed so far, these component pieces, are his creation. He created the neshama, he created the nefesh, he created the body, he created the Yetzer Hara, or Yetzer Tov, etc. So what defines us in the way we needed a 6,000-year time frame in all these struggles is how we create ourselves, is in what we choose in those moments between that tension and what we're choosing to do.
Precisely. That's the anochiut, which he described with Rabbi Carmel when translating it. The anochiut, the me, translates as ego, which is really the me, the I, in this whole construct, in the whole man, right? And that's the one that chooses, is there choosing to live in the world, right? So without the neshama, he's just choosing between good and bad all the time and dodging between the two and making decisions, making choices. But here we're introducing a new dimension, the dimension of Kedusha, of spiritually. It's not right and left, it's up. It's actually the choice for the person to elevate themselves and bring themselves up out of their brain, out of their mind, out of their thinking. Really, there are people who live in the world and they're living in their head. And we've discussed this before. But the person could be living in the world and living in the world from their perspective, their story. This is where it is. This is where there's this always conversation that's taking place in our mind, telling this is right, this is wrong, I want to be right all the time, I want to do the right thing, I'm going to do this. And that could pull you in directions which are very good, but actually you're still living in your head. But there's a point at which a person could get out of their head, let go, and then connect with their neshama and actually see that all they're living in is a perspective, and actually that's just a perspective, and it's not the truth. It's just a perspective. And then somebody else might have another perspective, and that's their perspective, and that's also not the truth. That's just their perspective. But the truth is actually where my neshama is. That's where I can get out of my head, out of the judging constantly the world, out of the conflict of the world, out of trying to prove myself right or prove the other person wrong, and just get out of that and live in the world and experience life in the world of Kedusha. That's living with one's neshama.
The other thing he points out is that the intellect is not something that is necessarily an asset. It can be used against us. As I was reading this, visualizing this scene from a gladiator movie where they have the two gladiators and they start throwing the weapons out in the middle of the fighting ring. And it's whoever gets to them the first, right? And one of the things we discussed on this podcast, done a lot of work on, is the imagination, how that faculty is where the Yetzer Hara does a lot of its work. It loves grabbing hold of the imagination and using it for its purpose. And what he's describing here too is that the intellect is also something that the Yetzer Hara can run out and grab that and use that against us in this whole quest of seeking truth. And because it can, with a higher intellect, it can find justifications, much more intelligent justifications for behaviors that are not appropriate. I do remember too, I caught this early on, that it started using some verses of Torah I had learned against me, or it allowed me to use a verse of Torah to justify behavior that was not in alignment with Torah. This is a very real thing to recognize, that if we're confident, like I'm an intelligent guy, I can win at doing this, that can be used against you.
Precisely. And a person can live the whole life, like the Ramban describes as novel Bereshus HaTorah, right? You can use the Torah to argue every case and then still live a disgusting life.
Okay, so he brings up two case studies regarding Abraham. The first is sort of a story in the Torah that helps us identify the issues. So if you could just sort of recap the first story of Abraham when he's interacting with Avimelech.
That's an amazing story. It's an amazing story because why? Avraham goes to the land of the Plishtim, he's with Avimelech, and there he introduces his wife as his sister. And we've seen this before when he goes down to Egypt. He introduces Sarah as his wife, as his sister rather than his wife, because he's worried they're going to kill him to take his wife. Here he comes to Avimelech, and the same thing story plays out. He introduces Sarah as his wife, as his sister rather than his wife. Avimelech takes Sarah, and there's nothing happens, but he has a dream, and Hashem says to him, "How could you take this man's wife?" He says, "I did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong over here. I didn't know that this was his wife. I thought it was his sister. We're over and above board." And the Torah is telling us that Avimelech, in his mind, in his whole society, was built on a strong foundation, and they were doing nothing wrong. There wasn't anything wrong. There was no reason why anyone should suspect them of being immoral. But they were doing things wrong. But this is the concept that we have, which is brought out by many other people. Dale Carnegie mentions it at the beginning of his How to Win Friends Influence principle. He talks about Al Capone, and when he was caught, and the guy, he was like a gangster. But he said, I'm just trying to be a good guy in the world. Yeah, kill people. And I'm just trying to be a good person in the world. That everybody justifies the lives that they live by saying, well, I'm doing the right thing. From my perspective, I'm doing the right thing, and this is what I want to do. And this is the right thing in the world. I'm trying to help people. But no, that's actually not. But we don't get that wake-up call. We don't actually see the truth about how we are in the world because we have a blind spot. And this is the coaching element of this whole book, which is that we all have blind spots. We have ways that we're functioning and operating in the world, and we might not actually know and realize and recognize our own blind spots, the way we are being perceived by others, or the way we are occurring in the world, the way we're doing things in the world. Actually, it might be that what we're doing is totally wrong. Avimelech is the example of that, lahavdil, between the Torah is teaching us a very powerful and important story over here. And that is that everybody's a tzaddik in their own eyes. Avimelech is a tzaddik, is a righteous person in his own eyes. He believes he's doing everything right. And when even God tells him you're doing the wrong thing, he says, no, it can't be. But that's the thing, that's our blind spots. We want to rationalize and we want to argue our case why everything we're doing is for the good, and we're just trying to be great, and we're just trying to be healthy and strong, make the world a better place. And it could be where actually the most dangerous and destructive people in this world.
Right. Yeah. Everyone, we've seen this, how any person imprisoned, most degenerate criminal, if you ask them, they all think that they are a good person. They have their code they live by. And, something I did an episode on this a few years ago, but as I started becoming religious, what a lot of Jews said to me was, why do I need to do all that? Can't I just be a good person? And the response is, yes, but how do we possibly know what being a good person is? And that's what Torah is there to do. It's Hashem from the outside giving us clarity on, and this is how to be a good person. Otherwise, what Rav Dessler is saying is, we're going to be clueless because of the opposition of the Yetzer Hara. I mean, basically, I set things up that the Yetzer Hara is sort of clouding what we're perceiving to begin with.
Right.
And maybe that's best explained with the next story of Avraham, why he got Eliezer.
Okay.
Okay, so because that not only brings clarity what the Yetzer Hara is doing, but also what the solution is.
Right.
Okay. So the next thing that Rav Dessler discusses is another story of Avraham Avinu, but this story is not only bringing much more clarity of the challenge and what the Yetzer Hara is doing, but it also provides the solution or how to handle it, how Avraham Avinu handled knowing this, even at his level, which there's a lot to say about this because it's against what we naturally want to do. And that is when it came to finding a wife for his son Yitzchak, he sent someone else to do it for him. He knew that he was going to, his Yetzer Hara was going to cause him to, again, this isn't even about bias now. It's about see what the Yetzer Hara wanted him to see versus what the truth was. And we see this a lot. I think he brings this up like just modern culture when it comes to spousal selection, where we think we can handle it in the most intellectually way possible, but the more advanced, in quotation marks, our society has become, the higher the divorce rate has gone. So obviously that is not the case. This is an area, and he knew this, and Avraham knew this. Even he wasn't even selecting a wife for himself; it was for his son, and he knew that the Yetzer Hara would influence that. He knew it was so important, not just for his son, but for the continuity and the eventual creation of the Jewish people to get it right. So, talk a little bit about that, like what Rav Dessler discusses as far as in this story.
Right. So when Avraham Avinu is about to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. So he sends Eliezer, his servant, back to his family, where his family is from, not wanting to take a wife from Canaan, but rather than go himself or send Yitzchak better to find a wife, which is naturally what we would do today in our society, and we'd say he points out, we would say, well, we're much more advanced now, and we don't have to do these archaic methods of finding a wife. He says, no, this is actually the optimum, the preferable way for a person to find his zivug, his besheret, his wife. And the reason is because there are so many things which, just to put it like infatuation, which can cloud one's vision and take one away from seeing the real truth about who one's looking, what one's mission is in life and what one wants to achieve by getting married, that Avraham Avinu really understood that would be dangerous. To go himself or to send his son to go themselves to find a wife for Yitzchak would be a mistake. And therefore he sent Eliezer. As a guide for us, there's certain decisions where, yes, it's true, a person mustn't marry a woman without seeing her first and without speaking to her and dating, which actually is what happens with Eliezer, because ultimately he finds Rivka, brings her home, and it's only then that Yitzchak meets her and marries her. He has to, of course, they both have to consent and they both have to want this marriage. But once the guesswork's taken out, it's a clear decision. It's clear that this is the right thing to do. Then Yitzchak's involved and marries Rivka. But the idea here is teaching us that there are certain decisions that if we were to leave ourselves to ourselves with our intellect and with our biases and with the different things that pull us in different directions, we might not be able to make an honest decision. And therefore, sometimes it's important to have an outsider to help us, to guide us and to do the groundwork, as it were, so that we can be in a position to make a rational and good decision. And that's what happens here with Eliezer. So he sends Eliezer Eliezer is the one who finds Rivka. Of course, he has no skin in the game. He brings Rivka back to Yitzchak, and when she sees Yitzchak, she wants to marry Yitzchak, and when he sees her, wants to marry her, and then they get married.
Well, there's some backstory on that as well, that Eliezer did have some bias of his own.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Dessler doesn't bring that up.
Not here, but he speaks about it later in a different place, and he speaks about the fact that Eliezer, his bias was that he had a daughter of his own, and he had wanted his daughter to marry with Avraham's son, and Avraham says no and sends him on his way. But Eliezer didn't verbalize his thing. All he said was, what happens if she doesn't want to come with? He gave excuses why it might not actually happen. He didn't say outright, oh, well, I want you to marry my daughter. In actual fact, Rav Dessler explains that Eliezer himself didn't realize that was what was in his way. He was just being hesitant. And then afterwards, later on, when Eliezer is telling over the story about how he found Rivka to Rivka's father and brother, Bethuel and Lavan, he says, I made the mistake of thinking that she was going to marry my son, but I can only see that was a mistake now because I see how right and correct she is for Yitzchak. And therefore, I realize my bias, my blind spot, as it were, retrospectively. But he's able to be retrospective and see his own blind spot. So yes, thank you for bringing that up.
So, and this has come up before with Rav Dessler about the necessity of having a rabbi that you go to and get outside counsel, which there is a resistance to that. And I think it's because as we discussed in prior episodes on prior essays, we're already wanting to go in one direction, and we don't want to have an outside party say, no, that's not the right direction. So, but you can see even the best of the best, Avraham Avinu, knew I can't do this. I need to delegate it.
Yes.
To do this right. And he also sort of brings up in this area too that one of the best combative ways against this is just having a fear of heaven. And I think having the proper context for what that means is important. But I think that's, a lot of the system Hashem set up for us with davening 3 times a day, fulfilling mitzvos, everything we're doing is constantly keeping us in that awareness that we're being watched. We have a creator that's observing everything we're doing. And deep down, we know when we think about that, we want to please him. And so that is an essential part of combating this whole situation. Now, I would say, too, that really the system Hashem set us up to live within is built around this. I mean, I don't know where this was stated, I think somewhere in the Gemara, but I've heard it quoted to me before that Hashem created the Yetzer Hara and he created the Torah as the antidote. And in the mitzvos and everything we're doing here. What else do you think is important to add to this topic? I mean, we discussed, we know that the Yetzer Hara is going to not only cloud our reasoning, but we're learning this essay to cloud even what we're perceiving of a situation.
Yes.
So the tactic is for one to always be conscious of Hashem at all times, which is just how a Jew lives, and then to recognize because of that, remember in the way of our father Avraham, that when we have those big decisions like that have multiple repercussions in our life and the world around us, get a rabbi that knows you well to help you out with a decision.
Yeah. I think you pointed to something that was very important over there, which is this concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Barati Yetzer Hara, Barati Torah Tavla, and I created the Yetzer Hara and I created the Torah as the remedy. And as we spoke before, that this idea of Torah itself helps us realize that there are different perspectives. I might have one way of thinking, I might be studying Torah and arguing one way, and then I see that there's a totally different way of arguing the very same fact, and now I have to just put what I'm thinking aside and be open to another way of thinking, which is something which is beautiful that learning Gemara, as we spoke before, gives us, right? Gives that opportunity to do that. And ultimately, in the Gemara, when the person's studying, you're really putting yourself into another way of thinking, which is what Avraham is doing when he sends Eliezer, which is saying, I'm taking my mind out of it, my way of thinking, my perspective, and I'm just handing over to you because it's actually it's a technical thing, it's a statistics. You can work it out. Is this the right person or not? Are they from the right place? Are they from the right family? Does it fit with our goals and our vision? Okay, let's interview her. Let's see. Let's get to meet. I don't want to go away from, just to change back to something which we were discussing before, which is this idea of that a person can live in this world like Avimelech lives in this world, and he's living in this world thinking he's a tzaddik, and he may be making right choices all the time, but as you said in your introduction, he's given the wrong numbers from the beginning. Right? He's not playing with a full deck, and so he can't really make the right way. He can't get in this world. And without a connection to our neshama, without a connection to the spiritual, to the nefesh, and for the nefesh to be connected to the neshama, without connecting to our neshama, without getting out of ourselves, without connecting to the spirituality of this world, you can actually miss this world. And that's why the Torah says, it says that a rasha, a wicked person, they maybe think they're living in this world, but they're actually not living. They may have a house and family and vacations and everything. They may be experiencing this world, but they're not living this world because they're missing the neshama. They're missing the spirituality of this world. And the tzaddik, on the other hand, even when he's passed from this world, he doesn't need this world. He's been through this world, but he's still living because he's a neshama. So that's our choice in this world. That's the whole purpose of it. This whole strive for truth is to strive to get out of our heads, out of our perspectives, out of our judgments, and connect to that neshama, that spark of God, that breath of God, which we all have a possibility to connect to, a choice to connect to. And that's our striving in this world.
And that is the truth that we're pursuing.
Right.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.